Hola, me llamo Víctor, el profesor del Horror Movie Syllabus. Mi español es muy malo. Tengo un sombrero. Hola, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to it in the description below. It'll give you a great download on what the Horror Movie Syllabus is all about, but in short, we're going to look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we're going to explore 3 movies from that subgenre. Today's subgenre is Mexican horror movies. And we've been going through a lot of the international horror movies throughout the years here at Horror Movie Syllabus. And we recently talked about Spanish horror movies. So now we're talking about Mexican horror movies. And aside from the fact that they're both in the same language, you're going to see some similarities in the tropes or lack thereof in these movies. Like Spanish horror films, Mexican horror films tend to be tropeless in a way, as opposed to some of the other movies that we've talked about from other countries, other regions, such as Australia or South Korea, for example. These movies, these Mexican movies tend to run the gamut. There's not really a specific style or trope that they're known for, or if there is, it's really a focus on supernatural horror, like more specifically occult or superstition or folklore, religion, mythology, things like that. That tends to be a lot of what you see when you're looking at Mexican horror. And of course, that's all good here at the Horror Movie Syllabus because we like all of that stuff, which might be an explanation as to why I tend to like Mexican horror as much as I do. Now, it's worth noting that Mexican horror probably isn't as prevalent or as dominant in the horror genre as a whole as many of the other international or foreign subgenres that we've looked at before. It doesn't have the same notoriety or the same infamy as some of the other subgenres, but that doesn't mean there isn't gold to be found in these mines. It doesn't mean that there's not good stuff here, because there is, and we're going to be talking about that stuff today. I feel like with Mexican horror, not unlike Spanish horror, you're going to start seeing more and more of it become more mainstream or break through to an American audience. I think you're going to start seeing it make more of a name for itself. You'll note that more of the movies that we're talking about are going to be a little bit more modern. We're seeing more noteworthy stuff come out of Mexico than we have in the past. And that's exciting. That's some good stuff because, again, there's good movies to be found. And let's be honest, it's much easier to find an American audience with a newer film than it is for them to discover older films. So we're seeing that happen, just like we were seeing it happen in Spain. And of course, there is, the little matter of Mexican directors just really breaking big in general in cinema, in American cinema. We've seen a couple of Mexican directors nominated and even win Academy Awards. Looking at Del Toro, Inarritu, Cuarón, there has been a lot of success by Mexican filmmakers. And Del Toro in particular is interesting because he got his roots in horror. He hasn't left horror. And in fact, spoiler alert, we're probably going to be talking about him a little bit today. So it's exciting to see Mexican film becoming more recognized in America and more appreciated in America. And I feel like Mexican horror is bound to follow suit, especially because, let's face it, supernatural horror doesn't go out of style. It always is good. It's always effective. People love it. So I'm excited to talk about what we're going to talk about today. Now, as usual, we're going to categorize the movies that we're talking about today an undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate level. And in this case, we're going to go with how edgy or taboo they are. The more we go on, the more edgy or taboo they're going to get, because we're going to talk about some really risque movies today. So buckle up and enjoy the ride. It's going to be a saucy one. So let's go ahead and get right into these Mexican horror movies. The first Mexican horror movie we're talking about today, the undergraduate level selection, is Kronos. Kronos came out in 1992, and right off the bat, we are talking about Guillermo del Toro, the director, as this was his feature film. This is his first feature film that he ever made, and it is absolutely brilliant, and it's getting more recognition now because del Toro has become so famous, so well-known, and so prolific that people are going back and discovering this gem that he led off with, and he really did knock it out of the park in his very first try. If you haven't seen it before, The movie is about this Mexican antique dealer who comes across a statue that has this mechanical scarab in it. It's kind of like this weird, like insect-looking brooch thing that, when activated, winds up kind of stabbing him and winds up giving him more youth, gives him life, gives him makes him look more youthful, gives him more energy, more virility, but it also gives him this unsatiable quench for blood. And you can kind of see where things are going there. Meanwhile, there is somebody who is looking for the scarab who wants that power for himself, and hijinks abound as they tend to do in these kinds of movies. But the movie is really great for a number of reasons, not the least of which is Del Toro's direction. Del Toro moves the movie along at a nice quick clip, making sure it never drags, never feels too slow. And he's also coming up with a really imaginative take on, well, let's just call it what it is, a vampire tale. I don't like to spoil movies too much, but in this case, the premise alone kind of gives it away a little bit. But this is not the vampire movie that you've seen any other place. This is a wholly unique take, as far as I know, a wholly unique take on the vampire mythos. I've never seen another story that had this device aspect into it and has the vampire symptoms being so specific and kind of spaced out and explained in a weird sort of way. It's interesting because it's not the obvious solution, right? People aren't saying, "Oh, you're turning into a vampire." It really has a lot more mystery built in around it in the world, in that world. When he's trying to figure out what's going on, he's slow to realize what it is that's going on. And also, a lot of the vampire tropes are kind of incorporated in really clever ways. Like, the stake through the heart thing is not exactly how you get rid of a vampire. I don't want to spoil things too much, but it really is kind of keeping the theme of vampirism without just doing the classic version of it that we all know and love. It's doing something new, something fresh, an original take on it. I love that Del Toro went this way with it. It makes for a really fun and unique and surprising take on a standard story, a standard monster. Speaking of monsters, that is kind of Del Toro's forte. That is what he's really known for, and you're not gonna get that really in this movie. I mean, you're getting the vampirism, but you're not getting the monsters that you normally expect when you think of a Del Toro movie. But that's okay. That's not really what the movie's about, and you still see inklings, hints of what Del Toro is going to be doing in the future. You see that Del Toro style starting to take shape. You're starting to see like the beginnings, the origins of the Del Toro style, as I like to call it, that fantastical, almost mythological monster creature effect thing that he would do so well in things like Pan's Labyrinth, for example. You see that imagination starting here, like with the scarab itself, and some of the shots of the inner workings of it, things like that. You're seeing the Del Toro that you expect. And it's neat to see that evolution from his beginnings here to what he would become. It's really fascinating. It's another reason why I like this movie so much. Everybody in the movie is doing good work acting wise. Federico Lupi and Ron Perlman, two actors who would pop up in a lot of Del Toro works, are here, and they're doing excellent work. Ron Perlman seems almost a little miscast here, but it works. It works really, really well. Remember, this is a Spanish language film. It's weird to see Ron Perlman here, but he does a great job, and it really, you can understand why Del Toro gets enamored with Lupi and Perlman, like, and why he keeps using them, because they work so well for the story that Del Toro's trying to tell, and it really shows a connection between actor and director. He's got them doing what he wants them to do, but also letting them do their thing, and it's a wonderful synergy. There's a wonderful synergy here between our actors and director that's working really well and making the characters feel more than just caricatures or stand-ins or whatever. They really have more depth to them, I guess is the way I would put it. And then I credit the actors with that a lot. They've taken what's on the page and they've created real life three-dimensional characters out of it. So I'm really pleased with the performances here, and I can very much understand why Del Toro would just keep using them throughout his movies. Like I said, the movie has kind of become more and more famous as Del Toro's become more and more famous. It's got a lot of critical acclaim right out the bat. It was received very well because it's a very good movie. It just is, it's a Mexican horror film from the 90s. Not a lot of people were seeing it. So it's in America at least. And so it's nice to see it becoming more well known now. It's really fun to see people go back and discover this hidden gem, if you will. And it really is a gem. It really is a fun take. If you like vampire movies, you've got to see Kronos because it's, like I said, just nothing else you've seen before in the vampire subgenre. So I didn't put it into the vampire subgenre because I knew I was putting it here, but I'm glad we're getting a chance to talk about it now because, setting aside, Mexican horror, this is just a really neat vampire movie that just feels really cool, really unique, really refreshing, frankly. And we've talked about some really great vampire movies, and I'd put Kronos right up there with any of them. I think it's an excellent film, and definitely one that vampire fans should definitely see, Mexican horror fans should see, Del Toro fans should see. Well, basically just about anybody should see it because it's really well made, really well done, really fun story. Just great all around. I have zero complaints about Kronos, and I hope to God they don't do a remake of it. So before they do, check out the original and let me know what you think. The next Mexican horror movie we're talking about is Here Comes the Devil. Here Comes the Devil came out in 2012 and is a polarizing movie to some extent, not because of the content, although the content in and of itself could be polarizing, but more because of people's opinions of it. They seem to run the gamut of the spectrum because there are a lot of people who find it very artsy and interesting and challenging and have a lot of merit. And there are other people who find it very confusing and messy and maybe overrated and pretentious. And I fall in the former category for sure, because I think this movie is absolutely excellent, but not without its problems. But we're going to get into all that in just a minute. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a family, a man and a woman, and their two small children who are, preteen, and they go on a little bit of a holiday, a daytime holiday, and the kids go exploring this cave, and then they get lost for a little while, and the police get called and everything like that. The kids are found unharmed about a day later, and everything's okay, or so you think, except that the kids start acting very, very strange. They're definitely not themselves, and the mother starts to believe that perhaps something is very wrong, like maybe they've been possessed or something like that. And hijinks abound, as they usually do in movies like this. And we are not going to spoil this one for you, but we are going to dig into it a little bit because there's a lot going on in this movie that probably needs to be talked about. First things first, we're already looking at movies that are, superstitious and folklore in nature. We kind of had that already in Kronos, even though the vampire lore is not specific to Mexico. But now with Here Comes the Devil, we are full on into superstition and religion and fears of the devil and, spirituality, things like that. It's front and center in this movie for sure. And it's interesting because that's not 100% clear or evident from the beginning of the movie, even though I guess from the title you should kind of have a hint of it. But the movie starts out almost like it's going to be a bit more of like a slasher movie. And it starts out pretty strong with some pretty graphic stuff. And then it kind of takes this sideways turn into these kids and this mysterious cave and this possession angle. And it really goes in a different direction than what I thought it was going to go based on the beginning of the movie. It all comes together, at least in my opinion, and that's where the controversy comes in, because there are a lot of people who feel that this movie does not congeal. It doesn't come together. It doesn't really make sense. And I can see why they feel that way. The movie does not spell things out. It does kind of have this weird, almost dreamlike quality to it where the characters kind of seem to be floating through their lives and they don't necessarily always do things that you would expect them to do. And I don't just mean the kids that might be possessed. I mean everybody. People don't always react in the way that you would expect them to react. And it can be a little jarring. It can be a little strange. This movie doesn't always feel like it's super linear. It is linear, but it doesn't always feel like it is. And that I can see why people would struggle with that. I kind of knew a little bit about that before I went into it. So I did understand enough of that to expect it. So it didn't throw me off as much as maybe it would another viewer. And I was able to follow the movie just fine. But I read a lot of reviews about this after the fact, preparing for this video. People had big problems with the narrative. And I didn't. But again, I can see why. And I think if you don't have problems with the narrative, I think you're in for a good time. The movie is a fun take on the possession tropes and, religion and stuff like that, and could fit into several other subgenres, which again is kind of like what I say when, Mexican horror films don't really have a specific trope, is they do feel like they can fit a lot into other subgenres, and this is definitely one that could fit into the religion subgenre, the possession subgenre, even arguably the slasher subgenre, but that'd be a bit of a stretch. It does have a lot of ways it could go into other subgenres, but it's definitely doing those things well. It definitely is making for a really interesting religious possession horror movie, and I think it does a good job of drawing you in. Even if you're not 100% following it, I think it's well made enough and well performed enough that you're gonna get sucked in anyways. I think that the way this movie's made, the camera work, the performances, the pacing of it, I think it just kind of naturally draws you in, or at least it did for me. Now, one thing that's interesting about this is the movie does feel like it has an obsession with like sex or nudity. I noted that there's 3 sex scenes in the first 25 minutes of the movie, and it's only like a 90-minute movie. So it feels heavy on like the nudity, the female nudity, even the male nudity, the sexuality, and I don't know why that is. It doesn't really seem to add a whole lot to the film. I'm no prude, of course. It doesn't really bother me. But I mention it because I know it's going to be potentially a little off-putting to some of you. So I mention it here. And it's also probably worth mentioning that the main actress, Laura Caro, is I guess she's a Mexican singer-songwriter. She's pretty well known more for her music than for her acting, but she's really good here. And she is very compelling as your lead. You really need to latch onto her because she's kind of your focal point, and I think she does it really well. So I was surprised to find out she was not really primarily known as an actress, but more as a singer. I'm not familiar with her music at all, but I really thought she does a great performance here, and I think everybody did. Even the kids aren't terribly annoying, and you know how I feel about kids and kid actors. They're fine here. They don't take too much off the table. They don't really ruin the film. That's a big deal for me. But the real issue here is if you're going to roll along with the narrative. The narrative, like I said, people describe it as messy. They describe it as confusing or incomplete. And I'm not going to say that they're wrong. I'm going to say I followed the movie. I understood what was happening. I understood the ending. I really liked the ending. I think the movie goes in some really interesting and somewhat dark places. I mean, we're talking about kids, right? So we're talking about bad things happening to children. So if that's a sensitive topic for you, be aware. But I think this movie is really great. I are on the side of it being artistic and maybe kind of, I don't want to call it elevated, but kind of, I guess, and not the mess people think it is. But I can understand the argument on the other side. So I think this movie is definitely worth checking out. I think it's a challenging film that is worth your time, and it has a really good payoff. But I'm not in the majority on this. It's kind of split, and I don't know if it's a 50-50 split, but not everybody shares this opinion. So I'd be curious to hear your take on it. If you've seen it, let me know what you think of it. And if you haven't seen it, check it out and let me know if you think I'm in the right, or if you take the other position that it's just kind of a mess and confusing. Let us know in the comments below. We'll have a conversation about it. And the last Mexican horror movie we're talking about today, the postgraduate level selection, is We Are the Flesh. We Are the Flesh came out in 2016, and if we thought that Here Comes the Devil was a controversial film, it's got nothing on this one. This movie is definitely controversial, definitely edgy, definitely not for everyone, because there is a lot of stuff in here that is very taboo, very edgy, very risque, and it's going to push some buttons. So it's definitely not for everybody, but we're going to get into it. If you haven't seen it before, the movie takes place in some apparent post-apocalyptic timeline, and we have this brother and sister who find this deserted building that actually is populated by one man who seems to have gone crazy from his isolation. He is really kind of out there, and they need to be on his good side because they need to be able to stay here where he has shelter and food, and they can't leave. They need to be able to stay. So they kind of have to succumb to his whims and desires. And he has decided that being in solitude has empowered him to explore his darkest, most depraved ideas and thoughts. And some really messed up hijinks abound at that point. I obviously won't spoil it for you, but this movie is insane. it really has a lot of crazy stuff going on that makes you feel like you are in the situation, because the situation is crazy. You've got this crazy guy who is just really intimidating and unsettling. It's played by Noe Hernandez, who is a famous Mexican actor. If you've seen Sin Nombre, you might know him from that. But he's done a lot of movies, and he is absolutely compelling in this movie. He is so unnerving. He has this ridiculously insane smile. Like, he would make an excellent Joker. Like, he just has this smile that conveys how insane he actually is, and it's absolutely terrifying. His performance is a big anchor for this movie, because you can't take your eyes off him when you're watching him, even though you want to, because some of the stuff he does is downright disgusting. But you can't stop watching him. He's just so good. Now, the other actors in the movie are good too, and they are, up to the task. And the task is Herculean, because they have to do some really insane stuff. It starts out somewhat okay because he seems nuts and he's doing this weird stuff, but when they come there, he's kind of pushing them a little bit. He's calling the boy names and he's kind of hitting on the girl, and it's just kind of off-putting and weird. But it gets stranger and stranger as you see that they have to help him turn this building into what I can only describe as a series of caves. And it's really kind of surreal, and it gets more and more surreal as things go on. But the things that happen in this movie are just kind of over the top in both tone and in terms of like appropriateness. The movie dovetails into things like sexual assault and incest and cannibalism. And I am pretty sure, I tried to research this and couldn't get the clearest of answers, but I'm pretty sure that what we're seeing is, if not all, at least mostly unsimulated sex on screen. This is actually happening on screen. And I'd say, like I said, 99% sure that all of it is unsimulated, because frankly, I just don't think they had the budget to simulate this stuff. It's real. It's there. You're seeing explicit stuff. You're seeing genitalia, male and female. You're seeing ejaculation. You're seeing penetration. You're seeing stuff happen in this movie. It's right there on the screen. And this is, of course, the biggest, most in-your-face thing about this movie. And I think it's by design. I think the director is trying to get in your face about it and trying to shock you and disturb you, and it's very effective. I don't think there's much of a reason for it. I think it's just shocking for shocking's sake, which I'm okay with. I can roll with that. Again, I'm no prude, but it's worth mentioning that it's unlike other movies we've talked about where it has this kind of explicitness or this kind of in-your-face sexuality and gore and stuff like that. There's usually maybe some sort of message or some sort of, maybe a kind of a political thing, or some sort of allegory that they're trying to make, some sort of social allegory. And I don't really think that's the case here. If there is, it's really messy and I can't figure it out. And neither could anybody else. Because I did the research on this. People couldn't figure it out. This is another one that's polarizing, but it's polarizing in the way that critics love it, but audience members not so much. And I think it's because of the content. I think critics look at it and see something artistic, and it's easy to see why, because this film is beautiful. The colors, the sound design, the performances, the set design, all of it just looks really hypnotic and surreal and ethereal. It's just shot amazingly well. And it just feels like this psychedelic dream that you can't get out of. Maybe like a psychedelic nightmare is probably more appropriate. It's very effective. It's very off-putting and disorienting in the best possible way. It feels like this kaleidoscope of just insane imagery that is really like horrifying. And just it's a nightmare trip. It's like a nightmare roller coaster. And I can see why critics look at it and see art. They see a challenging, provocative movie that is really trying to assault your senses and confront your sensibilities and make you think about things differently. And I agree with them on that. I see that too. But I can also see it as just being exploitative and in your face and just trying to shock you and gross you out, and it's going to do that too. So I can see why people do not react well to this. This is not a movie for everybody. Like I said, incest, sexual assault, cannibalism, nudity, all kinds of stuff going on here that for some people it's going to outweigh the really positive stuff. It's going to outweigh the artistry of the movie because you just can't get past the gross stuff. And you know what? That's okay. It's okay if it's not for you, because it's, like I said, it's not going to be for everybody, but it is a gorgeous movie, really well made, really well performed. Noe Hernandez in particular, just an incredible performance, but everybody doing very brave work here. And it's got an ending that I absolutely adore. I know a lot of people really don't like the ending or feel like it didn't make any sense or feel like it was tacked on. And apparently it actually kind of was improvised. There's some improvisation in this movie, apparently, but the movie's ending works really, really well. I'm not sure what it says, though. Again, deriving a meaning from this movie is difficult for me. I can't say for sure that I understood a message or a meaning to it, but I definitely felt it. I felt the movie. It moved me in that sense that I had a reaction to it, a visceral reaction to it that I felt was really, really successful. The movie really got me to a place that was uncomfortable and interesting and challenged me. And I felt better for it. I felt like I enjoyed the ride, but it's not, again, not going to be a ride that everybody enjoys. So look up some of the specifics in there. If I haven't told you enough before watching it, make sure you're down with it, because I know for some of you, you're not going to be down for it. But if you are, check it out and let me know what you think. And if you've seen it, let me know what you thought of it, because I would like to get other people's opinions on this. It's definitely a challenging, strange, unique film that is, again, not like anything I'd ever seen before, but I think it's absolutely brilliant. So that's going to do it for our exploration into Mexican horror. But I've got a few extra credit movies I want to bring up too, because I feel like they're worth discussing, worth talking about, and maybe even worth seeing. The first one I'm going to mention is a movie called Cemetery of Terror. Cemetery of Terror came out in 1985, and it is an interesting movie because it doesn't really have a clear subgenre or tone. It's kind of a mishmash of a couple of different things, and strangely, that actually makes it stronger and makes it work rather than make it fall apart like it should. But it's still not the greatest of movies. But we're going to get into all that in just a second. First, if you haven't seen it, the movie's about this killer who escapes a mental institution, but he's killed in the attempt of trying to escape. And his doctor wants him to be cremated because he believes that he's actually possessed by demons. And meanwhile, some kids on Halloween accidentally resurrect him and bring him back to life, and the killing ensues and hijinks start to abound. And then there's these other kids involved, and there's a cemetery that is the biggest cemetery you've ever seen in your life, and more hijinks abound, and things get really bizarre as the dead start rising from their graves. But we'll stop there because I don't want to spoil the movie too much. But the movie is kind of like two different movies. You could tell from my description that the setup starts like a kind of a traditional slasher movie. And for a big chunk of the movie, it is. It is kind of a setup for a slasher movie. It's a Mexican slasher, and I'm down for that. And that's something that I love me some slashers, so I'm very forgiving on it. And this one's not bad. It's got some cool kills in it. It's got a cool mythology with it. Again, we're talking more about, mythology, folklore, mysticism, religion and religious myth and superstition. It's not just a regular slasher serial killer guy. It's a guy who's been raised from the dead. It's a guy who's got demon possession and stuff like that. So that theme still runs through here, but it is still kind of going into the slasher beats, albeit it takes a little bit of time to get to them. It does start a little bit slow. It takes a little while to get to the good stuff, but once it gets to the good stuff, it really starts moving. You've got these kids trapped in this house, or really they're like young adults. They're like, in their 20s, and they, they're partying in this house, but then they're getting picked off, and it's just your standard serial killer slasher tropes, and it's great. But then it takes this left turn because you've got these other kids, like younger kids, like preteen kids, and they're celebrating trick or treating on Halloween. They decide to go into this cemetery, the cemetery of the title, and they get caught up in this mess as well. And because of this mysticism, this demonic presence in the story, these kids start getting attacked by, well, zombies, frankly. Dead start rising from the grave in the cemetery, which is, by the way, the hugest cemetery. Like, the cemetery must go on for miles. It's hilarious. They're running through the cemetery forever. But these zombies start coming out, and it's like, all of a sudden, you're in a zombie movie. You're like in Night of the Living Dead again. And the movie just kind of shifts gears. But it works for some reason. It really shouldn't, because you're watching this slasher movie, and then suddenly you're watching this zombie movie. But it totally works. But it works if you don't take the movie terribly seriously, because this movie is playing everything straight, but it's pretty campy. Mostly because of budget cuts. It's not really doing, as well as it should be doing. The effects aren't as great as they should be, but it still works for me because it's just made with a lot of fun and passion. Like they're having a good time with this. They're trying to tell you something cool, and it is cool. It's cool. It's just kind of corny because it looks a little cheap. Not all the acting is great. In fact, most of the acting is not that great. The exception being Hugo Stiglitz, who is the doctor who's trying to stop all this from happening. Hugo Stiglitz, another famous Mexican actor, very well known. In fact, so well known, Quentin Tarantino named one of his characters in Inglourious Bastards after him. It's kind of an homage. So you get the idea. He's kind of a well-known cult actor or something like that. But he's great in the movie. Everybody else, not so much. But that's part of the charm, part of the fun. I admit that I'm, bringing this one up in part because I love me some slashers, so I'm a little partial to it. Because the rest of the actors, especially the kids, not great. But it's got fun kills. It's got this weird switch into a zombie movie that somehow works. The zombies are pretty fun. The mythology is fun. It's just a fun movie. And I'm not the only one. Apparently this movie's got a bit of a cult following for being this fun movie that switches up genres or subgenres. And it's just a good time if you can let yourself kind of look past its notable flaws. If you haven't seen it, check it out and let me know if you think that you'd agree with me that the movie's fun aspects outweigh its kind of more eye-rolling aspects, because I definitely feel like this one is one you kind of have to give it a little bit of a mulligan and you'll have a good time with it. But I'd like to know what you think in the comments below. The next extra credit movie I'm mentioning is a movie called Mexico Barbaro. And Mexico Barbaro came out in 2014 and is an anthology film. It's a series of, I think it's 8 different short films made by different Mexican directors, all kind of dealing with various myths or urban legends or different kinds of supernatural type things, kind of, again, fitting in with the theme of what we were looking at today with Mexican horror films. This one's no different from that, but it is different in the sense that it's a modern anthology. If you haven't seen it before, it has 8 different stories that don't really have any through line, and there's not even really a wraparound story. They're just presented in a random order, and they all do have this kind of theme of different supernatural things and different kind of gory stuff. And that's really maybe the other theme of this movie is it tends to be rather violent, rather graphic, and rather gruesome. But we'll stop there so as not spoil the movie for you, even though I haven't really given much away, because again, we're talking about different little vignettes. Each story is self-contained. They're all about 10 to 15 minutes long, give or take, and they are differing in tone, differing in subject matter, but they all do kind of have a little bit of supernatural take and a little bit of, or a lot of, violence. Like with most anthology movies, they are hit and miss. Not all of them are good. There's not a consistency of quality throughout the movie. Some are better than others. But I'd say none of them are horrible. And again, they don't last long enough to outstay their welcome. So there's nothing to get too worked up about, because if you're not enjoying one, another one's going to come pretty soon. But again, I don't want to undersell the violence of it. I don't want to undersell the gore of it. Now, it's not as confrontational as something like We Are the Flesh, but it's still pretty confrontational. We're still looking at some really graphic violence and deaths and gore. We're looking at some taboo stuff like sexual assault again. It's really not going to be for everybody. And again, like we've talked about earlier, there's not necessarily a lot of message to be gleaned from some of this stuff. It does feel kind of shock oriented, like they're trying to shock the audience. And again, doing a pretty good job of it. Again, not quite as over top as some of the other movies that we talked about already, but still noteworthy enough that you should be aware of it. There is not as much comedy to offset that stuff as you would think. Unless you have a really dark sense of humor, which I do. So I did find some of this stuff humorous, but I'm not sure if you're supposed to. I think some of it is clearly supposed to be funny, but other stuff, I think I'm laughing at it because it's just kind of ridiculous and dark. But it is an interesting series of stories. All of them, or at least most all of them, are really well made. And that's part of why I'm bringing it up, is they're very well made. It's showing off the talent of these Mexican filmmakers. And I wasn't familiar with any of them by name, but their work is really, really good. Now, not always the greatest of acting, not always the greatest of effects, because there's a probably low budget, but they are very well made. You can see the filmmaking talent on display here, and that to me is the biggest reason why you should check them out. But also, they're just fun. I'd say I have a lot of fun with this movie. Again, nothing overstays its welcome. Everything's pretty short, so it's a good time. I would say the comparison I'd make it to is kind of like ABCs of Death. It's like slightly longer versions than those vignettes, but there's fewer of them. So if you liked that movie, you probably like this one too. And if you didn't like that movie, This is very similar in tone and style, so it's probably not for you. I remember rewatching ABCs of Horror and kind of being a little disappointed it wasn't as good as I remembered it. This one was as good as I remembered it when I watched it. I still had a really good time watching this one. So I'm feeling confident in recommending it to you. If you like anthologies, if you like ABCs of Death, this is probably one you should check out. But again, if you're sensitive to things, maybe look up some of the specifics of things that happen in this movie, because there's some stuff in particular that that may not sit well for you. Like if you have a problem with monster penises, this is probably one to skip. And if you don't have, if you like monster penises, this is a must see. So there you go. Do with that what you will. But if you do check it out, always let me know what you think. And the last extra credit movie I want to talk about is Alucarda. Alucarda, also sometimes called Alucarda, Daughter of Darkness, came out in 1977 and it's definitely one of the oldest movies that we're talking about today. And it's also maybe one of the most well-known, actually, for Mexican horror. This movie kind of has a bit of a reputation, and it's easy to see why when you see it, because it's a lot of fun and really good, but it's also kind of really campy and melodramatic, but in the best possible way, at least in my opinion. If you haven't seen it before, the story is about these two orphan teenage girls living in a convent who become best of friends. And one of them, Alucarda, is really kind of edgy and dark. And the other one, Justine, is kind of naive and kind of going along with some weird stuff that Alucarda gets obsessed with, most notably death and demons. And as they mess around with this stuff, they wind up getting possessed, much to the chagrin of the nuns in the convent who try to save their souls. And of course, hijinks abound as they do in these kinds of movies. And it gets pretty wild and crazy and a lot of fun. But I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But the movie is kind of a trip. It's got this kind of soap opera feel, maybe. That might be overstating a little bit, but the melodrama is thick. The way the actors perform is very big, and the dialogue is very, heavy-handed and just kind of hyperbolic and flamboyant and that's kind of silly, really. But it's played very, very straight. It's not played up for camp, but it does kind of come off a little bit campy. But as the movie goes on, that kind of slips away a little bit and becomes more and more dark and serious, but never losing that fun aspect to it. It's really kind of hard to explain without just seeing it, but it's really a great movie and a lot of fun. And if you're watching it, you'll doubt that early on, but by the end of the movie, I think you'll be won over, because at least that's how I felt when I first saw this movie. It won me over early on. I was just like, I don't know about this one. This seems kind of ridiculous. It kind of had like a Hammer horror feel in the terms of the aesthetic, which it kind of makes sense a little bit, given the time period and stuff. But it really kind of had a little bit of Hammer horror aesthetic, a little bit of like melodrama and gothic feel to it. But then it kind of just got more and more interesting and dark and like kind of became its own thing, and much to its benefit. It really, again, is dealing with that supernatural religious stuff. And in fact, that's probably one of the biggest themes of the movie, is like religion versus science, and like the explanation of Alucarda's behavior. And is it something psychological or is it something supernatural? And I think the movie answers that fairly easily. But it is an interesting thing that has led to a lot of discussion about this movie. This movie has a lot of critical acclaim, and there's a lot of discussion about the themes of it, like science versus religion, and the nationalism, and the idea of the hierarchy, patriarchal hierarchy, and religious oppression. All these different themes that are being discussed about this movie. But in reality, I don't think this movie has that kind of ambition. It's just having a good time. It's just trying to have fun. And one of the biggest reasons why it has that fun is Tina Romero, who plays Alucarda. She is very watchable. She's just really, really good in this movie. Interestingly enough, she is a US-born actress who moved to Mexico and had a big career there in Mexico in Mexican films. But it's also worth noting that this movie is the only movie we're talking about today that was made in English. It is made by a Mexican filmmaker. It's in Mexico, or set in Mexico, and but it's an English movie. So it's really an interesting take on Mexican horror, but it is definitely considered a Mexican horror film. It's one of the more famous ones, like I said. And again, because of these critical dissertations or diatribes about the different themes of the movie. And again, I think this movie's just trying to have fun. I think this movie's just trying to tell this kind of slightly sexy tale of these two girls who get possessed by demons and kind of rebuke the religious authority. And at that level, it succeeds. On the thematic levels that are being discussed, Maybe. You can maybe read into this stuff, but why? I think it's a little too serious to read into this. Like, I mean, some of the critiques are, they hold water, but it's like, really, you're seeing this deepness in this movie? That's hard to believe. One of the critics actually compared this movie to Ken Russell's The Devils, and I can see that comparison. It does have a very similar vibe, kind of a similar, storyline, sort of, but it's nowhere near as good as The Devils. Nowhere near as good as The Devils. So get that out of your head. But if you like The Devil, I could see you liking Alucarda. It's a good movie, and it's doing some really interesting stuff. It's got some fun performances in it. It's got some fun effects in it. It's kind of laughable in places, but you'll have fun with it. It's not going to be the kind of thing that takes you out of the movie and turns you against it. If you're rolling with it, you're going to have a really good time. I really enjoy this movie. Revisiting this movie was a lot of fun for this video because I was trying to look at it more from the critical angle because, doing the research on it and the critical acclaim for this movie, I wanted to see if I could pick up on that. I did not. I just still had a good time with the movie. I just think it's a fun movie. So that's the approach I recommend you take with it. If you get more out of it, if you get a deeper meaning out of it, if you pick up on some of these themes, let me know in the comments below. Tell me what you're seeing in there. I'm not saying they're not there. I'm just saying I think I have more fun just watching it and having a good time and letting it roll over me. But I'm anxious to see what you think. So check out Alucarda and come back in the comments and tell me what your opinion is of it. So that's going to do it for our exploration of Mexican horror. Like I said, these movies are a lot of fun, and they kind of run the gamut in terms of what they're about, in terms of story, in terms of kind of subgenres they could fit into. But they do seem to all have a lot of a focus on the supernatural. So if you like supernatural horror, Mexican horror is a good place for you to be checking things out. And now we're going to check out a horror trivia pursuit card. It's about that time where I read a question here live on camera and try to answer it. And we're going to go with the international category because we're talking about Mexican horror. So here's the question. 2007's Wreck makes use of what type of filmmaking style? So setting aside the fact that this is an easy question, if you've been watching Horror Movie Syllabus, I hope you know the answer to this question because we talked about Wreck when we talked about Spanish horror films. Wreck is an excellent movie. We talked about it at length, and we talked about how much I like that movie. A, because it's an excellent example of Spanish horror, and B, because it's an excellent example of this filmmaking style. This filmmaking style is a pretty well-known style. I'm kind of giving you guys a chance to think about it, but you probably already know the answer because it's not a hard question. But this is a popular style, but it runs the gamut because there's a lot of people who don't like this style because of certain limitations in that style. And I think that Wreck is one of the best examples, if not the best examples, of this style. We talked about that at length in our Spain video. If you haven't seen that video, go check that out. There's a shameless plug for myself. But I don't want to dwell on this one too long. I don't want to spend too much time dawdling on it because I think it's a fairly easy answer. If you've seen the movie, you know it. If you know what the movie is, you know it. If you've seen our video on Spain, you know it. And if you don't have any of those things, you don't know anything about this movie, then you're not going to guess. I guess you could guess, what kind of filmmaking style do you want to guess? Think about it quickly because I've been prattling on long enough. I'm going to give you my answer and then I'll check the card. My answer, of course, is it's found footage. Found footage is the filmmaking style, and Wreck is one of the best found footage movies you will ever see. It's just a really good example of making sense of that filmmaking style. You have a reason why they keep filming. You have a reason why the footage looks as good as it does because you've got a cameraman who's a professional in the story. It really does work extremely well. They do good examples or explanation of why that movie is a found footage and why it works the way it does. So if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out, by the way. But just check the card to make sure I'm right. Found footage. Yep, I knew that was going to be the case. That one's an easy one. Like I said, you had every reason to get it right. But if you got it wrong, I would like to know what that wrong answer is. I like to giggle at your guys' wrong answer. So the wrong answers in the comments below. I hope you've seen Wreck because it's worth seeing. I hope you've checked out some of these Mexican horror films because they are definitely all worth checking out. Some are better than others, of course, but check out all of them. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. Until next week when we talk about something probably a little bit different, if not a lot different. Class dismissed. Congratulations to Fernando Valenzuela, who is finally getting his jersey number retired by the Los Angeles Dodgers after many, many years. It is a long overdue, well-deserved honor, and I am very thrilled because me and my family love Fernando. Uh, yeah, this has absolutely nothing to do with Mexican horror movies. I wanted to say something about it. So, okay, let's get back to our regularly scheduled programming.